Lazarus After the Miracle, an original short story by Nicholas B. Morris. At first he only felt shock. He'd assumed that the tunnel of light would eventually bring him somewhere. Instead, he sat here in the dark. Then his memories flooded back. The lingering illness, the excruciating pain of his last days, the choking breath sliding out of him as he slipped away. Was that a dream? He asked himself. But a linen shroud covered his body, and even in the darkness he recognized the family sepulchre from the many burials he'd attended. I died, he said to himself. So why am I back? He heard the muffled, "Come forth!" from the other side of the stone walls, and Lazarus stood, hearing his joints crackle, stiff from disuse. The words echoed in his ears, down through his bones and organs, and Lazarus felt compelled to obey the command, certain that if he tried to stop, his body would betray him and drag him out of the tomb against his will. The stone rolled out of its place in the doorway, and he heard one of his sisters say, "But my lord, by now he stinks!" Light shot through the opening of the tomb, blinding Lazarus. He could only see the blaze of the sun at first. Then, abstract shapes took the form of his sisters, Mary and Martha, his neighbors, then the smiling face of his friend Jesus, the carpenter and healer from Nazareth. Another moment revealed the entire village of Bethany staring at him, jaws wide in amazement. "What is happening?" Lazarus said. The collective gasp of the multitude replied. Jesus took his hand. "Come, my brother, you must be hungry," he said, and Lazarus felt hungrier than he could ever remember. He ate bread and fish, and drank deeply from the wine, while all the people of Bethany clapped him on the back and said how they couldn't believe they feasted with a dead man. Jesus never explained to Lazarus why he'd called him back, and deflected each of Lazarus' attempts to discuss the matter with his enigmatic smile and a poetic parable as he dazzled disciples watching with adoration. His sister Martha said, "Just accept the gift of life." A few days later, Jesus and his followers departed, Mary tagging along to join the crowd of zealots. The day after they left, a man in temple robes came to the door and demanded to know if Lazarus had actually been dead, or perhaps part of some elaborate hoax, masterminded by that, quote, troublemaker, unquote, to further malign the priesthood. The man would not give his name and never quite seemed satisfied with their answers, but when he was convinced that Martha and Lazarus could tell him nothing else about the incident, he finally left. Every few days, though, he walked past the house, and Lazarus wondered how often he didn't notice the man, or his associates, skulking around the house, spying on him. The neighbors proved themselves more troublesome than the priests. At first they made light-hearted jokes, but those quickly lost their charm. Everything changed when Esther's son died after falling from a high wall. That night she beat her fists on the door of his home, wailing for Lazarus to bring his friend Jesus back to resurrect her son. After Lazarus explained that he could not fulfill her request, how could he possibly know where the wandering healer might be? She dragged him to pray over the dead boy's broken body, reasoning that the recipient of a miracle might be capable of sharing that miracle with another. Of course, nothing happened, except that Lazarus had to witness the suffering on the poor boy's face, frozen in the throes of his agonizing death, an image that haunted him every night of his life. Before long, the villagers treated him only with suspicion. How could anyone really trust a man who died and then woke up 4 days later like nothing had happened? He seemed immune to the various plagues and diseases that passed through Bethany every few years, and whenever he showed up to mourn for a lost neighbor, the bereaved family looked at him with disgust. How dare he show up, rubbing his second chance at life in their faces at the moment of their deepest grief? What had he done to deserve life after death? What made him special? What made him more special than their loved ones? Mary returned home after the day of Pentecost to announce that she would travel the world to spread the gospel of Jesus, the resurrected Messiah and King of the Jews. In this way, she avoided the resentment Lazarus and Martha faced on a daily basis. When drought came to the region, the steward of rations always scowled at Lazarus, wondering why he should help a man already once dead survive another day. Martha grew old, fell ill, and died as Lazarus sat by her bedside, helpless. Mary returned home many decades later, blind, deaf, and sickly. Lazarus, on the other hand, continued to labor on their farm, long after his contemporaries succumbed to aching backs and arthritic knees. Then Mary died, but Lazarus kept right on living. He lay awake at night, wondering why Jesus had cursed him with this never-ending existence. Death had been a peaceful nothingness. Living was a burden of suffering, contempt, and watching his friends and family fade away and die. Travelers knocked on his door every day, demanding to see the risen man. They asked their endless questions about, quote-unquote, the other side, but always left dissatisfied with his pathetic answers. His neighbors, the children and grandchildren of the people he'd seen that day, the only day that mattered to anyone, spoke to him less and less, convinced he was an evil golem, and his resurrection a myth to hide his wicked secrets from them. And every morning, as the sunlight crept across the cracks in the ceiling, Lazarus prayed that today would be the day God showed him mercy and brought him once more into the sweet, oblivious embrace of death. Thank you for listening to Lazarus, After the Miracle, an original short story by Nicholas B. Morris. Nicholas B. Morris grew up in Arkansas, but fell in love with Colorado. His stories and other assorted writings have been published in the Harpoon Review, Cliterature, Connotation Press, Danse Macabre Online, and Nebo. He has published 2 short story collections, the full-length Tapeworm, and the chapbook The Boy in the Well, both with the now sadly defunct Monkey Puzzle Press. You can buy copies of Tapeworm from him directly on Amazon. He works in his dream job as an assistant professor of humanities at the Community College of Denver, and he watches endless reruns of Star Trek with his partner Alyssa Pacini. The tracks behind Mr. Morris's story were taken from the Free Music Archive. The first track is Coma Dreamers 1 by Haunted Me from their album Pleasure. The second track is Blue Feather by Kevin MacLeod from his album Classical Sampler. The tracks are being used under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 International and Attribution 3.0 Unported licenses, respectively. I cannot thank Free Music Archive, Haunted Me, or Mr. MacLeod enough for providing such great music for free to the masses. Next up, join pros for an execution of a witch in The Omega.